For centuries, falconry has been a practice of patience, trust, and a deep connection between human and bird. But for my guest today, Ema, falconry is more than just a tradition. It's a lifeline. She's been immersed in this ancient art since childhood, training and hunting with birds of prey. But just like all great journeys, hers hasn't been a straight flight. In this episode, Ema takes us beyond the hunt. We talk about what it's like to acquire and train a bird for falconry, the thrill of working with these incredible creatures, and the meaning it brings to her life. But we also go deeper. In a chapter where she walked away from falconry, a time of pain and struggle, and how in the end, it was falconry that brought her back to balance, healing, and a sense of purpose. This is a conversation about resilience, rediscovery, and the powerful ways our passions can guide us home. Welcome to My Life After. Let's get into it. Ema, let's start from the beginning. What drew you to falconry in the first place? And was there a defining moment or a person that inspired you to do falconry?
Yes. I feel like it's a loaded question because there are like so many parts to how I got into falconry, but the story that I love to tell people, especially when I meet people just on the street when I'm, doing stuff with the birds or at work, is I've been holding a bird since I could hold a bird on my arm. So I don't even know how long ago that was. Must have been 5 or 6. My dad is actually the one who initially got into falconry, and probably around the time I was born is when he started, doing falconry and purchasing raptors and working with them. So I was the first one to get a lot of exposure to it, and I've been around these birds my entire life. I'd say that my dad is really the one who inspired a lot of that connection with birds and just animals in general.
How old were you when you got your first bird, and what was your first bird?
Harris hawks are the birds that we've had throughout our life. They're typically easier to work with and used for, everything from falconry to wildlife management. So they're a versatile bird to have. So I've had Harris hawks my whole life. But my first bird that I think I really connected with was a Saker falcon named Sky. She was absolutely beautiful. So I worked with her quite a bit when I was younger.
In terms of wildlife management, so I guess if we take a step back, falconry has been something that's been done in different parts of the world since maybe the 1400s or so. I think when people look to trace its origins, it seems to be like in the Middle East, in Syria, and maybe parts of Asia. But I think where it was first documented was kind of in the Middle East.
Yep.
So people use them to hunt. People use them for wildlife conservation. Some may call it a hobby, but really, I think it seems to be something that's really a lifestyle. I know I looked into falconry a long time ago because I just get these crazy ideas in my head and think, oh yeah, it would be really cool to have a falcon. And when I looked it up, it first of all, it wasn't very clear as to what the path is to falconry, because there weren't a lot of resources here in Canada as to, falconry in general. But it's definitely not having a pet. And actually, one thing I found really interesting was you also need a hunting license to falcon. So can you talk about yourself personally, what you do for wildlife management, how you use falcons and or other birds of prey for this, and what does falconry look like in, say, North America for somebody that wants to get into it?
That's a great question. So, and I like how at the start of that you kind of mentioned that falconry is a lot of things, or just working with birds of prey can be a lot of things. It can be a sport, it can be an art, it can be a tradition, it can be a hobby. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I've done a mix of the actual falconry, so hunting with the birds, and then the wildlife management. The wildlife management is kind of a mix of two worlds. So it's not just using the birds in my scenario. I also have a dog that I work with, and it just depends on the commercial site and what they need. But basically what we're doing is keeping other nuisance wildlife away from those facilities. So a really good example is Budweiser Stage, which is like a concert venue downtown Toronto. That's one of our sites where we actually go with the bird and we're keeping like seagulls and geese away, because what tends to happen is these birds will coagulate in this one area. Sometimes they're even hitting like the screens and the speakers. So it can be dangerous for the birds, but it can also be dangerous for people. So our job is to make sure that those, animals aren't in the area where they could come into harm's way. Most of what we're doing is, fairly like ecological and conservatory, in the sense that like we're not going and killing these animals. We're just keeping them away. We're keeping them at a safe distance. So, with the birds, it's flying them and essentially doing what we do in falconry, but without teaching the bird to necessarily go after the prey. And then I do the same thing with the dog too.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, getting into falconry in North America, if another one of those answers where it's like, it depends. And I know you mentioned it's been tough to find resources online, and there is a little bit of a reason for that. I think sometimes people can get, really excited about doing something like falconry and kind of get ahead of themselves and not realize how much work it really is. And like you said, it's a lifestyle. It's a very big commitment, like, akin to maybe having horses or a dog, but, you can't just necessarily slack off and go 5 days without going out with your dog or something, right? If you actually want to hunt with the birds, you do need to have a hunting license and a falconry license. Falconry license, there's a few different ways you can go about getting it. So, typically you're out in the field and working with another falconer, a general falconer, and they're the one that's teaching you the ropes, and you have to have a certain number of hours under your belt before you can apply for a license. But there are lots of different clubs and groups of falconers that you can interact with, and most of them are really nice people, and they want to teach others. They just want to make sure that those people are being safe when they're, engaging in the hobby or the sport. But North America, in general, doing falconry, like I know in the States, it can depend state to state. There can be so many rules and restrictions. So it's really important to go and do the research yourself before getting into it.
How does one get a falcon? So just say I want to get into falconry. How does one acquire a falcon or a bird of prey? Because technically falconry is the term, but you could use hawks, you could use eagles, kestrels, etc. I remember a long time ago, I think everyone in some way, shape, or form has seen clips of this, if not the whole documentary about the eagle huntress, that girl in Mongolia who's amazing, where every year in Mongolia they have this gathering of tribes of people that use eagles to hunt. And I'm giving some background for listeners that may have not seen this, where it's a male-dominated sport, but there's this man who has this daughter who is very much into the family tradition of hunting with an eagle, and she's quite young. But when she gets her first eagle, they had to basically eagle nap it, right? You have to just catch it yourself from the wild. Is that how it works in kind of the North American context as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Short form, yes.
I keep thinking maybe you and your dad did this when you were
something along those lines.
Yeah.
I really resonated with that film because it's so similar to my story, and how I got into falconry in a sense. But there are a few ways. You can either get a bird from, another licensed falconer or breeder who has them captive bred. That is a really good way to kind of preserve the lineages of birds, and especially some of the more exotic birds that we may not have indigenous here in Canada. But for the indigenous birds, trapping is a really big thing that we do, especially for a lot of falconers here in Ontario, going out and trapping redtails. There are plenty of them. You will see them along the highways. And, that's another piece of the conservation aspect to falconry is, the statistic is that 90% of first year birds will not survive. 90%. So that's their mortality rate. So, us going out as falconers and trapping these birds in their first year and, building that bond with them and working with them, we give them a better chance at survival, right?
Yeah, and I've heard that the relationship with the falconer and the bird increases their chance for survival. It teaches them how to hunt. But I guess I'm wondering, well, how can a human teach a bird to be a better hunter than, the bird's mother or father?
That's a good question. It depends. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily teach them to be a better hunter, but to, build a partnership with them where now we're hunting together, right? So, I'm teaching the bird that it can rely on me to be his hunting partner, and that when it's with me, it's going to find something to kill and it's going to feed off that, and I'll make sure that it's fed and happy, and then we'll go out again. So it's really building an intimate or dynamic relationship in that sense.
How do you build a bond with the bird? How does that work? How does that partnership work? I keep thinking of Daenerys Targaryen and the dragons, right? Like if you watch Game of Thrones, but it is that bond. And a long time ago, I did horseback riding, and there was a bond that I had with a particular horse. I never had my own, but there was a bond that I had with my particular horse, and where there were days where I'd be in a rush and show up for my lesson. I'd be flustered. My heart rate was increased, and I wasn't fully there because I was so worried about being late. I didn't have that connection with my horse, and it wouldn't be obedient. It wouldn't listen to me. But the days where I got there early, I fed it, I groomed it, I created that bond within a few minutes before we started our lesson, I would have a great lesson. Now, you have these birds over a certain period of time. How do you create that bond with the bird? And do you feel that kind of spiritual connection as well?
That's a really, really good question. And another one of those answers where it's like, well, it depends. It depends person to person. I think it also depends on someone's philosophy on, what they believe to be the relationship between birds and humans. Some people think or believe that, birds are purely instinctive and instinctual. And that is typically the best way to see it, because they can be a fairly dangerous animal if they're not trained properly. But, there's also the other side of it where some people believe that you can build an emotional connection with a bird in the same way that you do with a horse or with a dog, right? So, looking at it from the aspect of like, I'm, about to do falconry or wildlife management, I think for me, the best way to view them is seeing them as if they're like a snake. Snake people would probably understand this really well. Snakes are very instinctive creatures. And so a lot of, their relationship with humans is based on their relationship with food and with humans, and how the, human trains them or works with them, and that whole dynamic. And so I like to see birds that way for a few different reasons. One of the main one is safety. I don't want to get, too attached or too emotional with a bird and then completely let my safeguards down. And next thing you know, the bird becomes a little bit too dependent on me and it can become aggressive. And that has happened, and I've experienced that, and it's not fun. Been grabbed by quite a few birds in my life. So, you do have to have this very fine balance. But at the same time, there is that other aspect, like you mentioned. Like, I do believe that birds can feel our emotions and feel our energy. And I think spending so many years with a bird, you do build a connection. And I do think that they have emotions in them somewhere in there. So, yeah, I think it's important to still kind of keep that side in consideration, but never let your guard down too much. Never trust them 100%.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they are a wild animal, right? I mean, you are acquiring them from the wild. It's not like they've spent many generations of a lineage being bred in some captivity. They will have those instincts very near to them. And I think the other thing too, it's seen as a partnership, right? It's not a pet and owner relationship. It's a
Yeah.
partnership, and I think that that's one of the things that I guess drives the relationship, right? It's
Yeah.
hey, our duty is to go out there and get a rabbit or another bird or whatever it is, and bring it back, and you get a piece of it, right? You get a commission from whatever it is that you catch.
Yeah.
How do you get an animal that has those wild instincts to fly away, catch something, and then bring it back to you?
Well, that's part of that very like food driven and food based relationship that we build with them. So, for example, I could be going out with my Harris hawk, and the way that I would, it's a very slow process, the training process. Like it really starts from like the very basics until eventually you are going out into the forest and working with them and having them fly to you. But it starts from a very basic movement, which is just getting the bird to come to the glove for a little bit of food. Eventually, once that bird learns, okay, like, when I come to the glove and when I sit nicely in the glove, I get fed. And so eventually you start to create more and more distance. So, you'll have them on a longer chain. You'll put them up somewhere, maybe on a fence or on a chair, move further back, have a little, tidbit of meat on your glove and have them fly to you. So you start by building that relationship before you go out into the forest. And now you're saying, okay, like when you catch something and I come over to you, I'll maybe hide the rabbit or whatever it is that they caught and I'll trade them off on another piece of meat. And so I'll say, okay, like, thank you for catching that. This is your share. Now let's go again, and I take my share. So I have to assert that dominance and say, you've done good. I'm going to take it and let's keep going. But it's a process.
So the animal has to start being tethered to you physically in some way. Otherwise, it can't just fly off, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, sometimes if you're starting with a bird as young as a chick, you may not have to tether them at the start because they're going to become an imprint. So they will imprint on you and, they will just see you as their food provider. And, maybe it's a little bit easier to go without tethering, but typically tethering is the process to start.
Okay. And so you finally get them to hunt. They bring the prey back. Now, how often do you have to exercise these animals? How often do you have to continue with the training? And what does that look like? How do people who have regular jobs and regular life also incorporate having a falcon in their life and exercising it every day, training it, and what does that look like? And even how do they go on vacation?
Sometimes they don't. Well, it is a serious commitment, and more so than a dog in that regard, because it's not necessarily easy to take care of them, and not everyone can do it. So I would say that when you're going into falconry, you have to kind of know that there is going to be that time commitment. That when you're done work at the end of the day, well, the bird still has to be exercised and has to be fed, and you have to do something with it to continue that bond. Like, you can't just leave a bird in their mews or aviary for a week or two because you're busy and then expect to just pick up where you guys left off, right? They can forget what that relationship is like fairly quickly and wild out pretty quickly, because they're not a domesticated animal like a dog. So it is quite a commitment. And I think for regular people who have a regular 9-to-5 job, you have to know what you're getting into. But it is doable. I mean, most of the falconers that I know are hobby falconers. Like, it's just their sport and they like to do it just like any other hobby or sport. And they have their regular 9-to-5, but they make sure that they have the time to commit before getting into it.
It's definitely something that's not easy to walk away or transfer to someone, right? Like, you can't give a falconer to a sitter while you go to Mexico for a week. Like, it probably takes a lot of planning and arranging with somebody else who's part of a community to offload that, right? So
Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly. Well, thank God I have a family who's into it. So if I'm away, I have someone to watch it who knows what to do and vice versa. But it's not easy.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time where you've stepped away from falconry? I mean, you said that you did falconry or you were exposed to it as a young kid and growing up, your dad always made time for it as well. Has was there ever a chapter in your life where you took a break from it and you thought, okay, well, I'm kind of bored of it, or maybe there was something else in terms of life happening that took you away from it? Was there any time in your life like that?
Yeah, actually there was, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it's not a very clear path when you're a falconer, not always. And I think for me, growing up with falconry and being around it my whole life, eventually I got to a point in my young teens where, in a sense, life got kind of busy, but I also went through, like you said, like a chapter that wasn't the easiest, so I didn't really have the time for falconry. So um I was probably doing falconry from, let's say, 5 until I was maybe 14 or 15. And then I took a little bit of a hiatus. I was actually, it's a story that I don't really tell often. I was I was in a relationship actually that was not a healthy relationship. It was a fairly abusive relationship, and I think that relationship really took a lot of the life out of me, quite literally. And so I wasn't interacting with animals for years during that period. Like I can't even remember spending time with my dogs. I can't remember going out, into the forest with my birds because I was, all consumed by this really, really toxic relationship and at such a developmental time in my life.
How old were
It was
you?
hard. I was about 15 or
Oh, I'm
16.
sorry. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sorry at any point for anybody to go through that, but to experience that at such a young age, that's very hard. I mean, we're not going to get into the details of that, but
Yeah.
in terms of how it impacted you, like how long did it take for you to realize that, hey, this is something that is not really who I am and what I want to be part of in terms of how I see my life? How long uh, of a period or of time did it take for you to kind of realize that, and how did you get out of it?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two ways that I look at that point in my life. In one way, the relationship itself was about 2 or 3 years. So there was a point where I'd kind of reached my limit as how much, I could take as a person and created that separation. But I think the other part of it was also the healing process. And that has been much, much longer. Like I said, like I was still developing who I was when I
Hmm.
was going through that relationship. So now when it had ended, to kind of have to heal, but then also like grow up in a sense wasn't easy. So I felt like that healing process must have been probably still till now. Like I'm sure I'm still healing in a way. But I think that, that's why I mentioned that was my hiatus. Like when I wasn't doing falconry, I think that uh sort of a way that I signal to myself that I'm ready and I'm myself again is when I started doing falconry again, when I was able to connect with animals in that way again. That makes sense.
It's one thing that a lot of us experience in life, going through some sort of trauma, some sort of pain, especially at a young age, in different ways. Sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes it's a relationship with somebody in your family, or sometimes it's other factors. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing: even as adults, we still have a very strong sense of our inner child, and that impacts us throughout our life, right? It's a time capsule. We time capsule trauma, especially, right? It's in our bones, it's in our skin, it's in our DNA. It's just part of our inner fabric. And also, when you're 15, you're really trying to form an identity. as well
Yeah.
socially, right? You want to be accepted, and you don't really have a lot of things to work with when you're a kid. It's not like you're an adult, you're working, you're making money, and you can buy things that you want, and you can spread your friend group and be friends with whoever you want, and you can be a bit more discerning, right, with the people you hang out
Yeah.
with. You're trying to make something of yourself, and then at the same time you're maybe falling in love, and that doesn't go the way that you expect it to. So it is quite hard, and the journey is however long it takes, and you are where you need to be in life at this particular time. You're meant
Yeah.
to be nowhere else, right?
Yeah.
And I think we talk about this a lot on the show. The One of the greatest gifts is self-awareness, is knowing that something is not right, is knowing that
Yeah.
someone is not right, and knowing that there is another way to do something so that you can make yourself better, right? And I guess the backdrop of all of this is, yeah, going back to your roots.
I did actually have a chance to listen to the pod with Chantal. Wow.
Yeah, she's
Fabulous conversation.
yeah, she's pretty amazing. She's
Yeah.
pretty amazing, and a lot of people got a lot out of that conversation
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. There's a
It was
lot
so good.
that a lot of things where in life we have certain blockers and we transfer them on other people. My ex and I, we dated for 2 years, we were married for 2 years, and we just weren't a good fit, and just kind of went through the process of that. But I realized that person that I chose was um, I chose her because I didn't really know me, right? And I had an idea of what I thought I wanted, and that was because I didn't really fully know myself. And I'm not blaming her. Like she was who she was, and but me back then is thinking, oh, but there's these other nice things, or there's these other things. They make me feel special, and whatever. And part of it was also maybe compensating for my lack of confidence in certain areas. So I chose this very strong personality, but that person really wasn't the right fit for me, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of that. So there was a lot of rewiring, and that I had to do a full journey into um, better knowing myself, and then choosing a partner eventually that would that I would have better alignment with, right? And I was
Yeah.
telling a friend today who's going through a divorce that said, it's not about finding somebody who's has stuff in common with you, because if you really love someone, you don't need to do something have something in common. They're just going to love you enough to do stuff like that you like to do because they love you,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
falconry, your fiance wants to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I said, what you want is you want somebody that has baggage. And I purposely said this. You
Yes.
want somebody that has been through the shit, but they've dealt with their shit. Because it's one
Yes.
thing to have baggage and never deal with it. And those people are the ones that'll transfer it into, hey, that person's not good. That person's not good. Not fully realizing that, hey, you haven't really dealt with your own shit. So, stop looking for it in other people, right?
Yeah.
But you want somebody that's been through the ringer so that when they come to you, they've worked through it. The worst thing is
Yes.
meeting somebody that's had a pretty good fucking life, and the smallest thing throws them off whack. And I'm thinking, you're kidding me? Like, that is the worst thing that ever fucking happened to
Yeah.
you? Like, give me a fucking break, right?
Yeah.
And that is so to me, not that you're asking for my advice, but to me, it's really having somebody in your life that has that awareness, that has maybe been through something, but they know that there's other things that they need to work on, and then they're not
Yeah.
transferring their own inefficiencies to yourself or other people around them, right? At
Yeah.
the end of the day. And so that's a very powerful thing. And then also the things that we learn from our parents' relationship, because at the end of the day, a lot of who we choose in a partner is based on who we choose as what our parents' relationship was
Yes.
and what their dynamic was.
Absolutely.
So, but when you find the right person, it's like sky.
Yeah.
It's having that spiritual connection, and you will make mistakes and they will forgive you. They will make mistakes. You'll forgive them, and you grow together, and you want to grow
Yeah.
together. Right. So,
Yeah. I resonate with that so heavily because I feel like in this relationship, like there were so many things that I had to unlearn that I didn't realize that I was doing, both things that were habits from the traumatic relationship, but also habits and things that I learned from my parents, who are Croatian parents. And so there are, there's my own baggage and trauma from that too, right? And so like to meet somebody who was able to hold space for me was such a weird thing for me to have to learn,
mm,
or who would show me just affection and just love me. I couldn't
mhm.
even accept it at the time, at the beginning. So I had to like unlearn and have these conversations with him and myself and be like, oh my God, like you're safe. You're
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
You're safe and you're loved. It was like healing this like child version of myself where I was just with someone who is emotionally mature and could just love me and hold that space for me, and everything is going to be okay. Like that was groundbreaking, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. And I'm so glad that you found that person. I find a lot of times we have trouble finding that person because we don't love ourselves, right? And I realized
Yeah.
that was part of my journey, was that I
Yeah.
didn't love myself. And loving yourself is not about, oh, I'm great and I'm beautiful and whatever, all of these things. Loving yourself is saying, hey, you know what? I'm not great. There are certain things I suck at, but I'm okay with that. I forgive
Yeah.
myself for that. And that is self-love, right? Because
Absolutely.
we can't be everything to everyone. And you realize this, at different points in your life, especially when you were telling me when you were 15 and going through your journey. I thought back to myself. I'm like, I was just trying to be accepted by anybody because I had a tough
Yeah.
time socially, right? I didn't, I had a tough time with friends and bullying and not fitting in and things of that nature. And to add a different layer on that, like my heart goes out to you, and I'm glad
I
that
appreciate
you
that.
uh, you got out of that. And what you just said right now, having somebody that creates space for you, going back to something that is very ingrained in you, and actually represents freedom. There's nothing freer than flying and soaring above everything else, right? And
Yeah.
when you sit on a plane and you look down and you're about to land in a country, but you're still fairly high up in the ground or high up from the ground, you look at the world and you think, wow, it's so beautiful. How is there so much war? Like, how is
Yeah.
there so much poverty? Because I'm from the plane, I'm seeing mountains, I'm seeing ocean, I'm seeing small lights and small car lights of cars moving around, and the world looks amazing. And it doesn't look that big. The world physically doesn't look that big when you're flying, right?
Yeah.
And then you get down and you see all the shit that we put ourselves through. But so there's nothing freer than flying.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you went back to that, and it became, going back to your roots with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had felt like I lost myself for so long. And I think even, in the healing process, like I almost felt like I had to create this like other version of myself, this like alter ego to kind of cope with the trauma and to, not continue to be so like insecure and helpless. And, I kind of feel bad for all the people that I met during that period because I was probably a horrible person. But, eventually after the pendulum kind of swung back into the middle and I felt a little bit more of that balance, and I worked through the trauma, a lot of it on my own, and did a lot of, you know, talking to the trees and the animals and the wind, to be honest to God. I think that's what I needed. I eventually found myself, and it that's such a good analogy that, there's nothing more free than flying. And that's exactly how I feel about reconnecting with falconry. I just feel like I'm myself again. I get to be that kid that wanted to be a falconer, and now here I am, right?
when you look at birds of prey, I mean, you would know a lot more than me, but birds in general, they sense our energy and the chemicals, that we might be emitting, or is chemicals the right word? The hormones that we're emitting from their nostrils on their beak, like that's how they sense prey with heat. And so they're very sensitive, right? They may not engage us like a dog that just wants to be, petted and things like that. But they do sense, I think animals just very instinctively read energy, they read vibes, and they do form a bond with you because you, at the end of the day, are their means of survival, right?
Yeah.
For the time that they're with you. And I think that's the other thing that I wanted to ask, which when I was prepping for our call, I found interesting. When we think about conservation and falconry for conservation, we think of, using the birds to hunt so they reduce the number of rabbits or, rodents in a particular area, or maybe other birds and things like that. But the conservation aspect of it is also to keep it going. So a lot of falconers, or maybe all falconers, release their birds after a certain period of time as well, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk about how that works? Like why do people release? After how long do they release? And must be very hard after you form a bond with the bird to release, right?
Yeah. The only situations, at least as far as my knowledge goes, where you would be releasing is if you did trap a bird from the wild. Usually, like if it's a bird that is captive bred, they don't. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. All good. Don't worry.
We'll have to cut that out.
Yeah.
Hey, that's enough.
He just wants to know, or she just wants to know, they don't want to be forgotten. You're talking about
Yeah.
a lot of birds.
Yeah, they're like, we didn't help in this process. But the only situations that I know of, birds being released in is if they were initially wild, because captive bred birds don't have as much of the instinct and the knowledge to hunt on their own. So they become dependent on humans and form that relationship with them. So to just release them is like a death sentence. So in those situations, falconers keep those birds for as long as that bird is alive. But with wild take birds, it depends. Some people will, have the bird for about a year or 2 years and then release them. It's typically not, too long of a period so that the bird can kind of readjust to going back into the wild and survive.
Okay.
Yeah.
What type of birds do you have?
So mostly growing up, it's been the Harris hawks. Now we have a ferruginous hawk. She's huge.
Okay.
She's a very large bird and a beautiful bird. And I think this year we might be adding an eagle owl to the family, which I'm beyond excited about.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
An eagle owl. I used to know a lot of the birds of prey. I'll have to look up eagle owl. Peregrine falcons are the fastest animal on the planet. How hard is it to get something as unique as that? And they must be quite expensive. I mean, how much are we talking just in terms of pricing?
You know what? It depends. Sorry, I know everything depends, but falconry is just like that. With peregrines, so you could potentially get a peregrine as cheap as, $600 or $1,000, but you could also get a peregrine that's like 1.2 million.
Really?
If they're, racing birds, if it's a bird that's trained to be fast, especially out in the Middle East, like that is...
That's where I was going to say, that's where there would be money, where somebody would spend that much. There's also the historical aspect of it. And then there's probably gambling on the back of that to pay for that bird, right?
Yeah. For sure. So
that's why somebody will pay 1.2 million for a falcon. That's amazing. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So,
but they're not necessarily difficult to get as a falconer. My dad is actually living now out west in Saskatchewan, which is like where falconry had. They have the biggest club in North America, but it's a big place where falconry had originated in North America because it's the Great Plains, right? And so he's out there right now, and he will typically work with peregrines, or sometimes with other falcons, and he just loves working with birds that are fast and going out for just the fun of the hunt.
Okay, that's amazing. There must be a pretty amazing community around falconry as well,
Yeah.
right? It's such a unique sport.
Yeah.
So when we were talking previously, you got engaged. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What was the prerequisite for your fiance to be into falconry, or is he into falconry, or is he going to get a falcon? What does that look like?
Yeah, you know what? That's always been a key part of my dating life, was I'm a falconer. So that's how I got him. No,
He has to have a big hawk.
Yes. Large. But no, I think he was kind of like taken aback, like when he first met me, and he was like, what is falconry? Like, I don't think it's hard for people to conceptualize, especially if they've never seen it or been exposed to it. So they're kind of like, okay, like, what does that mean? But, from the moment that he actually saw me holding a bird, he was like, you're the coolest person I've ever met in my life. And yeah, he really wants to get into it. So he's kind of slowly learning, and I've been working with him and getting him to hold the birds. And, I think there's a little bit of fear around it too, because you're like, I've never been around a bird like this, and they're huge and their talons are huge, but he's learning, and he's loving it. So I hope to have him join me soon.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I've done a pretty bad job of in terms of my guests. So usually I'd have a guest leave a question for a following guest, and I haven't been keeping track of that. So I made up my own bonus question to ask you. So you mentioned you had a particular bird that you were very close to at one point. If that bird could talk, what would it say about you?
Wow, that's a good one. What would she say about me? I think she would probably say that we were really, really good friends. I think we were really, honestly, good friends. Not hunting partners, but good friends. I think we built such a cool relationship over the years that she was alive, and I think we connected on a much more spiritual level than I have with any bird since. I think we would say that we were really good friends.
What period of your life was she part of your life?
From about, crazy enough, probably 7 or 8 until I was 15, around the time that I had gotten into that relationship. I think just before then she had passed away. So she lived to be about 8 or 9 years old, but yeah, that's an amazing bird.
What was her name?
Sky.
Oh, that was Sky.
That was Sky. Yeah.
Well, Ema, thank you very much for joining me today. I think we had you opened a window. Part of the reason I do this podcast is to open windows into areas of people's lives that we may not have exposure to, or may have always wondered, or just to see what does it look like in the perspective of somebody else. And I definitely do think you are one of the coolest people I've ever met. And as I mentioned, I want to bring my daughter one day to see the falcons, to see the birds, and maybe if you're exercising them or taking them out, would be great to do that. But thank you very much for joining me today.
That's the plan. We are going to do that, and hopefully I'll have an owl that she can see. She will love it.
Oh, I don't have. I was going to bring it in the background as a joke, and I forgot to. I have the Harry Potter owl, the one that you press and it makes a noise. I got it from my daughter. But yes, that's a snowy owl, if I'm not mistaken.
Owl. Yeah.
Yes. But no, we are definitely going to do that. So I look forward to doing that.
To it.
Yeah. So
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I love this.
Ema's story is a testament of the power of passion, resilience, and finding your way back to what truly matters. Falconry isn't just about birds. It's about the bond, the discipline, and the sense of purpose it brings. And for Ema, it became a path to healing, guiding her through one of the darkest times in her life and helping her rediscover balance. If her journey resonated with you, I encourage you to explore what brings you that same sense of connection, whether it's nature, a craft, or something you've been meaning to return to. A huge thank you to our sponsor Heal3, a curated well-being solution for your employees, because when we take care of our people, we help them show up as their best selves. I'm Steve Joseph, and this has been My Life After. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep finding your way forward.